My daughter called me an embarrassment in front of our extended family and friends at the Thanksgiving dinner because I refused to fund her vacation to Greece with her friends. So I totally cut her off financially and quietly transferred ownership of the house she lives in. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you how everything unfolded. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout-out in our next story. Today's special shout-out goes to James Gray from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. The turkey was perfect, golden brown, skin crisp just right, juices pooling at the base of the platter like a quiet reward for hours of careful tending. I'd basted it every 45 minutes, even brushed the skin with melted butter and rosemary like some Food Network dad with something to prove. Hosting Thanksgiving had become my tradition ever since Ellie's mother left. Maybe not in the classic Norman Rockwell sense, but in the way that mattered, family gathered, table set, and no one sitting alone. I'd bought the best Pinot Noir I could afford and even ironed the cloth napkins, because appearances still mattered to me, even if they didn't to everyone else. The house buzzed with the low hum of conversation and the smell of roasted garlic mashed potatoes. My sister Joan was in the living room with her husband, and the Jenkins family, our neighbors of 15 years, filled up the far end of the dining table. Ellie strolled in late, dressed like she belonged on a travel blog's front page. Linen pants, crop top, sunglasses perched on her head despite it being evening. She had that confident glide of someone who believed the world owed her a good time, and for years, I'd done everything in my power to make sure she never found out otherwise. She kissed me on the cheek with the detached affection of someone fulfilling a social obligation. "Dad," she said with a quick grin. "Smells great in here. Your turkey game's still strong." "Thanks, kid," I said, carving the breast into thick, even slices. "Grab a plate." Everyone settled in with plates piled high, laughter rolling across the table like warm air, until she dropped the match. "So, I was thinking," Ellie said, twirling her fork through the stuffing. "I need help booking this trip to Greece. Flights are a little insane, and the Airbnb wants full payment up front. But it's not that bad. Only around $4,000. You can cover it, right?" She said it like she was asking me to pass the salt. The room went quiet in stages. First, Joan stopped mid-chew. Then the Jenkins teenage son looked up from his phone. I set the carving knife down and straightened my back, napkin still tucked in my collar. My heart thudded, not from shock, but from the final confirmation of something I'd been denying for too long. "No," I said, calm and firm. "I can't." Her eyes widened like I'd just slapped her. "What do you mean can't? You own this house. You just spent God knows how much on this dinner." I said I can't. I repeated, sharper this time. "And even if I could, I wouldn't." She laughed, loud and theatrical. "Wow, you're really going to do this here? In front of everyone? You're embarrassing yourself." No one laughed with her. Joan shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Jenkins took a sudden interest in his sweet potatoes. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't look away from her. She was 23. No job. No degree. Living rent-free in the guest house behind mine. And still, she acted like I owed her more. "I think you've embarrassed yourself just fine," I said. "Dinner's over." She scoffed, pushed her chair back with a screech, and stormed out, muttering something about how she couldn't wait to get the hell out of this place. The room sat in stunned silence. I cleared my throat, picked up the carving knife again, and sliced another piece of turkey. Who wants seconds? No one moved. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, its blades slicing the air with surgical precision. I thought about Ellie's face, twisted with outrage, and how it mirrored the toddler tantrums she used to throw when I wouldn't let her eat ice cream before dinner. Only this time, there was no picking her up, no kissing her forehead, no fixing it with a bedtime story. This time, she meant every word. And so did I. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up to a silence that felt heavier than usual. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that settles on your chest like a truth you can't ignore anymore. I didn't bother with breakfast. The coffee brewed itself while I stood at the kitchen counter staring at the back door, the same one Ellie had slammed so many times as a teenager, the same door she now walked through like a queen returning to her castle. I had built this little guest house for her when she turned 20, thinking it would give her some privacy, a sense of independence while still keeping her close. That was my first mistake. I confused comfort with love. I gave without condition, without asking for anything in return, except maybe some basic respect. But respect, I've learned, is the first casualty when you raise a child who never hears no often enough. I sat down at the table, coffee steaming in my hand, and opened my laptop. There wasn't much fanfare in what I was about to do, just a couple of emails, a few scanned documents, and one brief call to my lawyer, Ben. "You sure you want to do this, Tom?" he asked, his voice low and cautious, like he was stepping around broken glass. I could hear the judgment laced in professionalism, and part of me wanted to backpedal. But another part, tired, wounded, and long ignored, spoke up before I could falter. "Yeah," I said. "I'm sure." He didn't press further. Just said he'd draft the paperwork. We'd transfer the house, the guest house, into my name alone, rescind the arrangement that gave Ellie free rein, and file a notice of eviction. All legal. All clean. No shouting. No drama. Just action. Just boundaries, long overdue. It wasn't about the money. God knows I'd spent more than $4,000 on less important things over the years. Private school tuition she never appreciated. A used car she totaled within 6 months. Bail money once, for something she still claims wasn't her fault. But this wasn't about grease or $4,000. It was about a pattern, a slow erosion of respect, a hollowing out of gratitude. Every time I gave, she saw it as expected. Every time I hesitated, she called it cruelty. She was no longer a child, and I was no longer willing to be her safety net while she burned bridges and lit fires behind her. That night, I typed up a short letter, direct, polite, and final. Effective immediately, financial support will be discontinued. You have 30 days to vacate the property. I didn't embellish. I didn't explain. I just signed it, attached it to the legal notice, and sent it through Ben's office. Part of me hoped she'd never open it, that she'd call, come over, try to understand instead of explode. But I knew my daughter better than that. She would blow up. She would scream. She would paint me as the villain in whatever version of the story she told her friends. Over the next few days, the text rolled in. First came confusion. "Dad, what is this letter? Some kind of joke." Then irritation. "You're seriously doing this to your own daughter?" And finally, fury. "I can't believe you. You're a pathetic, bitter old man." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I knew they wouldn't matter. Reasoning with Ellie was like trying to hold water in your hands. Eventually it slipped through no matter how tightly you tried to grasp it. She was drowning in her own entitlement, and I couldn't save her this time. I wouldn't. The guest house lights stayed on late into the night, her shadow moving behind the blinds. I imagined her packing in angry bursts, shoving things into boxes with the kind of chaos only indignation can fuel. I wondered if she'd look at the photos on the wall, the ones I'd framed for her birthday last year, old snapshots of us fishing, at the beach, her in pigtails and missing teeth, and feel anything close to what I felt. Grief, maybe. Loss. Not just of her home, but of the version of her I used to believe still existed. Joan called that weekend. I didn't want to pick up, but I did. "Tom," she said immediately. "No greeting. You're making a mistake." I leaned against the porch railing, eyes fixed on the soft glow from the guest house. "Am I?" I asked. "She humiliated you," Joan continued. "Sure. But this is going nuclear." "You really think she's going to forgive you for this?" I sighed. "She doesn't have to forgive me. She just has to grow up." Joan was quiet then, and I could tell she was weighing how much more she wanted to say. "You were always too soft on her," she muttered finally. "Maybe this is your guilt catching up to you." I didn't disagree. Maybe it was. But that didn't make it wrong. The eviction notice was official now. The house would be rented out to new tenants in a little over a month. Ellie hadn't said anything since her last venom-laced text, and I'd stopped checking her social media. There was nothing there I wanted to see, just filtered photos, curated drama, and passive-aggressive captions aimed squarely at me. Let her talk. Let her rage. This wasn't about public opinion anymore. It was about reclaiming what little dignity I had left after years of being treated like an open wallet with a beating heart. On the 30th day, I watched a moving van pull up to the guest house. Not Ellie's, but the new tenants. A young couple, bright-eyed, full of thank yous, and we're so excited. I nodded, walked them through the place, handed them the keys. Ellie had left earlier that morning. Left the place clean but cold. No goodbye, no note, no trace of her except a small chipped mug with the words "World's Okayest Daughter" on it. I held it in my hands for a long time. Then I set it down and locked the door behind me. When the eviction notice first landed in Ellie's inbox, I imagined she didn't even read it all the way through. She probably skimmed it between texts with her friends or while uploading a story to Instagram. The subject line alone must have seemed like satire to her. Notice to vacate. 30 days. To Ellie, that kind of thing happened to people with bad credit or legal issues, not to someone like her. Someone who'd never known a single consequence she didn't talk her way out of. I waited 3 days after it was delivered. 3 days of silence. No calls, no visits. Then, as expected, the disbelief arrived right on schedule. I was in the garage, fixing the squeaky hinge on an old toolbox drawer, when my phone rang. Ellie's name flashed across the screen like a flare warning of the storm ahead. I picked up, bracing myself for impact. "Dad," she said, laughing but with an edge. "I just got this weird email from some lawyer claiming you're evicting me. You didn't really send that, right?" Her voice was sugar-coated, mocking. She was already preparing to frame this as some elaborate prank I'd cooked up, one of my dad jokes, as she used to call them. I kept my tone steady. "It's not a joke, Ellie." Silence. Long and sudden, like I'd flipped a switch. "Wait, what?" "I gave you 30 days, I said plainly. "You need to be out by the 1st. She didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then, "Are you out of your king mind?" Her voice cracked at the edges, disbelief giving way to fury. "You're evicting your own daughter? Are you seriously this petty over some Greece trip? You humiliated me in front of everyone, and now you're trying to throw me out?" I sat down on the workbench, the cold metal groaning under me. "You embarrassed yourself, Ellie. And this isn't about Greece. This is about everything that led up to it. Years of disrespect. Years of taking me for granted. You're insane," she spat. "This is literally abuse. I'm going to tell everyone. Grandma and Joan. Hell, I'll post it online if I have to. Let's see how you like people knowing you're heartless enough to throw your kid on the street." I didn't rise to it. I'd been the villain in her stories before. Whenever she failed a class, it was because I pressured her too much. When she lost a job, it was because I never taught her how to handle stress. Every disappointment in her life had somehow worn my face. "You're not a kid anymore," I said quietly. "You're 23. This was never meant to be permanent." "Bullshit, she snapped. "You begged me to stay here after college." "No," I said, my patience thinning. "You dropped out and moved into the guest house without even asking. And I let you. I let you because I thought I was helping." Her breathing grew louder through the line. Erratic. Hurt. But also furious that her tactics weren't working. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "You'll die alone, and don't expect me to visit your sad little funeral." Then she hung up. I stared at the blank screen for a long time, not shocked, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that comes after years of carrying a weight you convinced yourself wasn't that heavy. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, picked up my wrench, and went back to work. There was nothing left to say. Over the next week, she didn't call again. But I saw the shift. Her car, once permanently parked in the guesthouse driveway, began disappearing for longer stretches. Boxes appeared on the porch, then disappeared. I saw her once through the kitchen window. Standing outside, phone pressed to her ear, pacing in small, agitated circles. She didn't look like the confident, sarcastic Ellie I remembered. She looked lost. And still, I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't care, but because caring had always meant giving in. This time, it had to mean letting go. Joan texted me 3 days before move-out day. "She's staying with a friend. You really went through with it, huh?" I didn't reply. I knew what came next. Ellie would reframe the story. "Dad kicked me out. Dad's bitter and controlling. Dad has abandonment issues ever since Mom left. Let her." People believe the version that makes the most noise, and Ellie had always been the loudest voice in any room. The new tenants were scheduled to move in on a Saturday. I told Ben to handle the keys and final walkthrough. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to stand in that doorway and pretend this was some neat, clean transition. It wasn't. It was messy and painful and necessary. But life has a way of circling back to what you want to avoid, and sure enough, that Friday evening, she called again. This time, her voice was quieter. "I'm out," she said. "Left the keys in the mailbox." I waited. "Okay," I said. "Hope the new place works out." Another silence. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, "Why now?" I could have said 1,000 things. Because I was tired. Because I was scared she'd never change if I didn't. Because I loved her enough to stop enabling her. But I just said, "Because you said you were grown." I believed you. Then I hung up. When the dust settled and Ellie was fully moved out, the silence left behind felt unfamiliar, like walking into a room where the furniture had been rearranged in your absence. There were no more footsteps shuffling across the gravel path from the guest house, no slamming of the door at odd hours, no passive-aggressive humming of pop songs loud enough to be heard through my kitchen windows. At first, I welcomed the quiet. But within a few days, it stopped feeling like peace and started feeling like tension before a storm, the kind of quiet that meant someone, somewhere, was loading their ammunition. And sure enough, the first shot came from my sister. Joan called during lunch the following Tuesday, just as I was sitting down with a turkey sandwich and a bag of kettle chips. Well, she started before even saying hello. I finally talked to her. I wiped my hands on a napkin and leaned back in the chair. "Let me guess," I said. "I'm the devil in her story." Joan sighed, deep and dramatic. "Tom, she's hurt. She's living in someone's spare room. She's crying all the time. She doesn't understand how you could do this to her." I took a long sip of my soda, letting the sting of carbonation keep me calm. "I didn't do this to her," I said. "She's not a victim, Joe. She's 23. She had years to get her act together. Joan wasn't having it. You blindsided her. No warning, just a lawyer's letter? You couldn't have had a conversation first? Maybe asked her to pay rent or contribute something." "I did ask," I snapped. "More than once. She always had an excuse. She was stressed. She was figuring things out. She needed a little more time. And I gave it to her. I gave her 5 years of time." My voice was rising, more than I wanted. I rubbed my temple and took a breath. "I'm done negotiating with someone who doesn't respect me." There was a pause, the kind that told me Joan was calculating her next move. "Look," she said finally, "you're her father. You're supposed to be the bigger person. You don't just cut your child off and let her fend for herself like a stranger." "I didn't treat her like a stranger," I said. "I treated her like an adult." That's what she kept insisting she was. But Joan had already shifted into older sister mode, the same tone she used when I first came home with Ellie as a newborn, terrified and clueless, and she told me to stop holding her like a football. "She's not going to forgive you for this," Joan said. "Maybe not ever." "Then she won't," I said. And I meant it, even if my chest tightened as I said it out loud. That week, the ripple effects began. A few mutual friends. People I'd known for years through neighborhood events, community work, the occasional poker night, reached out with carefully worded messages. One said, "Heard about the situation with Ellie. Just wanted to check in." Another asked, "Was it really that bad?" The ones who truly knew me didn't judge, but they didn't rush to defend me either. Everyone treaded softly, afraid to pick a side. But the worst were the acquaintances who had no idea what had led up to it. They just saw a father evicting his daughter and drew their conclusions with permanent ink. One neighbor's wife even cornered me at the grocery store, near the frozen vegetables. "You know, some people think you're being extreme," she said, smiling like she was commenting on the weather. I just stared at her, holding a bag of peas in one hand, and replied, "Some people don't know the full story." Ellie, for her part, went quiet. Her social media grew louder in contrast. Posts about fake family, captions about choosing your own tribe, the usual coded jabs that don't name names, but might as well include a photo and timestamp. She looked tired in her photos. Her eyes weren't lit up like they used to be, even when she smiled. I hated that I noticed. I hated even more that I still cared. But the part of me that had driven to every school play, waited outside every bad date in my truck, and brought soup to her bedside when she faked a cold just to skip work. That part still checked her profiles like a habit I couldn't break. At night, I'd walk past the guest house and see the porch light I'd installed flickering slightly. It was empty now, but echoes lingered, her laughter, her yelling, the clatter of her shoes against the hardwood floor. I wondered if she missed it. If she missed me. But I also knew that missing someone doesn't always change them. Love, I've learned, isn't always enough. Not when it's one-sided. Not when it's mistaken for obligation. Ben called midweek to confirm the tenant move-in had gone smoothly. "Place looks great," he said. The couple's thrilled. Said it feels like a fresh start. I smiled faintly. "It is," I said. "For all of us." I didn't expect an apology from Ellie. I didn't expect understanding from my sister. But I hoped quietly, stubbornly, that someday Ellie would look back and realize this wasn't cruelty. It was mercy. The kind she couldn't see because it didn't come wrapped in comfort. I didn't raise her to be helpless. I didn't survive my own heartbreaks and failures just to hand her a life on a silver platter she'd never polished herself. The world doesn't teach boundaries gently. It usually waits until you're too far gone to fix what you let slide. I didn't want to wait for that. I wanted her to feel the weight of self-responsibility before it crushed her. If that made me the villain in her eyes, so be it. The weeks that followed felt eerily suspended, like time had stopped moving forward and was circling the same silent loop. I didn't hear from Ellie, not once. No calls, no texts, no surprise knock on the door. She vanished from my life the way she always threatened to when she was angry, only this time, it stuck. At first, I kept expecting a crack in the silence. A message, maybe even just a sarcastic comment thrown my way. But nothing came. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt something heavier, a kind of hollow ache that sat in my chest like a second set of lungs, breathing disappointment into every quiet corner of the house. I tried to fill the time. I cleaned the garage, reorganized the shed, even joined a local book club that met at the library every other Thursday. It was mostly retirees and bored empty nesters, but they welcomed me like I'd been a member for years. We read slow, sprawling novels about people who lived through wars, lost their children, lost themselves. It was strange how fiction felt more honest than anything Ellie had said to me in months. The conversations helped, anchored me to people who had also survived heartbreak in quiet, steady ways. But every time someone mentioned their kids or grandkids, I felt a twitch in my jaw, like a muscle remembering how to clench. One Saturday afternoon, I went to the guest house to fix a leak under the kitchen sink. The new tenants were out, so I let myself in. The place looked different, cleaner, brighter, redecorated with framed photos of strangers and cheerful throw pillows. Still, I saw Ellie in every corner. I saw her curled up on the couch watching reality shows, her face lit by the glow of the screen. I saw the counter where she used to leave half-eaten takeout and unopened mail. I saw the spot by the window where she once cried after a breakup, blaming the world, blaming me, blaming everyone but herself. I stood there for a long time, sponge in one hand, wrench in the other, unsure if I was remembering or hallucinating. When I finally crouched under the sink, I found something wedged behind the pipe, a small bracelet, plastic bead strung on a thin elastic band. It spelled out her name in uneven colors, ELLA, probably from some childhood arts and crafts kit. I held it in my hand and felt a surge of something I couldn't name. Not regret, exactly. Not guilt. Just weight. The weight of having loved someone so completely, so persistently, and still ending up here, alone, unacknowledged, estranged. I put the bracelet in my pocket and finished the repair in silence. Around the same time, I started hearing small things about Ellie through other people. Joan mentioned she'd picked up a part-time job at a local boutique downtown. "It's not much," she said, "but at least she's getting out of bed." A former neighbor said she'd seen Ellie at a farmer's market, selling handmade jewelry at a booth. "Looked like she was trying," the woman added. She smiled a little. I nodded, thanked her, pretended it didn't matter. But at night, I'd think about those small, anonymous updates more than I wanted to admit. They were proof, however faint, that she was building something, however messy, however late. I didn't call her. I didn't show up at the boutique or the market. I didn't like or comment on anything she posted, even when the captions were less venomous and more vague. Quotes about resilience, photos of sunsets, a blurry selfie with the words, "working on me." It wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing either. And I figured that maybe the silence between us wasn't entirely hollow. Maybe it was space. The kind you need to figure out if you're growing or just drifting. I kept myself busy, took up cooking again. Not because anyone needed feeding, but because I missed the ritual. I made gumbo from scratch one night, just to see if I still could. The kitchen filled with smells that reminded me of old Sundays, of Ellie scraping her plate clean and asking for seconds with a grin. I sat alone at the table, ate in silence, and didn't cry. I just remembered. One evening, I passed by the guest house and saw the porch light on. The tenants must have forgotten to turn it off before leaving for the weekend. I stood there for a moment, staring at the light, and wondered if Ellie ever did the same. Wondered if she drove by the street at night, wondering if I was awake, wondering if I missed her. The truth was, I did. Every damn day. But missing someone and inviting them back into your life are two very different things. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The book club picked a man called Ove that month. We talked for almost an hour about the difference between being lonely and being alone. Most people saw Ove as bitter, but I didn't. I saw him as someone who had given so much for so long that he didn't know how to receive anymore. Someone who had built fences not to keep people out, but to protect what little was left inside. When it was my turn to share, I just said, sometimes people don't come back the same after you give them everything. No one asked me to explain. They just nodded, quietly, and moved on. I started walking more. Down to the park, through the neighborhood, past old places Ellie and I used to visit. I never changed my route. Part of me hoped I might run into her. Not to talk. Not to fix things. Just to see her. To see how she moved, how she carried herself now that the world wasn't padded by my sacrifices. But she never showed. And still, I walked. I returned to the deed paperwork one gray Wednesday morning, sipping bitter coffee at the same table where I'd once written Ellie's first rent-free lease, like it was a sacred contract between a hopeful father and a daughter I believed was just finding her way. Back then, I typed it up with pride, thinking I was doing the right thing, giving her space, giving her time, giving her everything I had left. Now, as I stared at the official document, stamped and notarized, I traced the ink of my signature at the bottom and reminded myself that ownership wasn't just about legal boundaries. It was about finally reclaiming the parts of myself I'd handed over too freely for too long. There was a time I thought being a good father meant shielding her from every consequence, absorbing every failure, fixing every mess before it ever had the chance to touch her. I wanted her to feel protected in a way I never did growing up. My own father taught me lessons with silence and belt straps, taught me how not to talk, how not to cry, how not to trust softness. I didn't want that for her. I wanted her to know that home wasn't a war zone, that love could be a roof and a warm meal and a light left on late at night. But somewhere along the way, the love got twisted into something else. An unspoken contract that said you give and I take, over and over, until neither of us remembered where it started. Now, with that same signature, I had redrawn the line. The new tenants had settled in nicely. A young couple with a baby on the way. Every so often I saw them through the window painting the nursery or unpacking delivery boxes, laughing over something I couldn't hear. Their joy didn't sting the way I thought it might. In fact, it felt like confirmation. Life was moving forward. The house had found a new rhythm. And maybe, just maybe, so had I. A few days later, I found myself driving past a shopping district on my way to the hardware store and caught a glimpse of her, Ellie, through the storefront window of a boutique. She was folding sweaters, her hair tied back, a pin tucked behind one ear. She looked tired, but not broken, not angry, just real. A woman doing a job, living a life, figuring it out 1 hour at a time. I didn't park. I didn't go inside. I just watched her for a few moments from across the street, then drove off before she could spot me. I don't know if I was proud or heartbroken. Maybe both. Maybe always both. That night, I took out an old photo album, one I hadn't touched since she moved out. I flipped past the baby pictures, the elementary school awards, the Halloween costumes I used to stitch together with duct tape, and whatever was left in the junk drawer. There was a picture of us on the front steps of the guest house the day we finished it. I remembered her hugging me around the waist, chin on my stomach, grinning like she owned the world. I remembered thinking, this is it. We're safe now. She'll be okay. But love isn't a lock you put on someone's door. It's a door you leave open, even when it hurts. I placed the photo album back on the shelf and turned off the lights, standing in the hallway a moment longer than usual. There was no one left to tuck in. No one to check on. The quiet had become familiar now, not friendly, but not cruel either. Just mine. And in that space, I found something close to peace. The next morning, I walked the long way to the mailbox and passed the guest house again. The baby crib had arrived. It sat disassembled on the porch, waiting for a Saturday project. I offered to help when I saw the husband struggling with the manual. We spent an hour on the floor with Allen wrenches and mismatched screws, talking about nothing in particular. He didn't know much about me, just that I was the landlord, that I kept the place in good shape, and that I was around if something needed fixing. That was enough. I didn't need to be more than that anymore. After we finished, I stood at the top of the porch stairs for a moment and looked out toward the road. I thought of Ellie again, how far she'd gone, and how close she still felt. I didn't know if she would ever come back. I didn't know if there'd be an apology, a moment of clarity, a sit-down over coffee where we talk like adults instead of circling old wounds. Maybe not. Maybe this was all there'd ever be between us now. Distance, fragments, and a stubborn kind of love that couldn't be stitched back together. But I'd stopped needing closure. Some stories don't end with a clean final chapter. Some just stop mid-sentence, and you learn to live with the comma. I walked back to my house slowly, thinking about all the things I'd wanted to say but never did. I wanted to tell her that I missed her, that I still looked for her in crowds, that I hoped she was eating well, getting enough sleep, staying safe, that cutting her off didn't mean cutting her out. But I also knew that love without boundaries isn't love, it's submission. And I'd done enough of that. I'd finally stepped back, finally drawn the line, finally said, I can't carry both of us anymore. And now? Now the deed was mine. Not just the legal paper in a drawer, but the truth of it, the ownership of my home, my peace, my limits. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting. I was here, alone, and steady. If this story moved you or made you reflect on your own experiences with family, boundaries, or self-preservation, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue telling raw, honest stories about the complexities of family. And we'd love to hear how this one resonated with you. See you soon in the next one.